I want to welcome everyone to the October 24th, 2018 meeting of the Committee on Agency Operations and remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live via the Internet. It's 2 o'clock exactly. The first agenda item is approval of the minutes from the July 25th, 2018 Committee on Agency Operations meeting, and do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. The next item on our agenda is public testimony. We've not received any requests for public testimony. Is that correct, Ms. Battles? So we'll move on to the next item. The first item under agency operations is a report on grants and contracts, including those exceeding $1 million. This item does not require any action, and our General Counsel, Bill Franz, is available for questions. So I'll pause, and we can all look at that list if you'd like to. Mr. Onway, it's this one right here. And it's only if you've got any questions about it.
Good, good.
Mr. Onward, do you want a little bit more time to look at it, or are you good on it? Okay. Let's move to the next item, which under agency operations is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee relating to a contract with Ms. Sun, what do you say? iSphere, okay, for Phase 2 of the Web Focus upgrade and security remediation project. And Ms. Sun, the Assistant Commissioner for Information Solutions and Services, will present this item to the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. So this agenda item is to see... Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I turned it on. So this agenda item is to seek the board's approval for the agency to enter into this contract with iSphere for the Phase 2 implementation of the Web Focus upgrade and security remediation project. Web Focus is our agency's primary business intelligence and reporting tool. It supports applications used by both our internal and external users. So the version of the software currently is out of date, and then security vulnerabilities were identified during the most recent scan conducted by the Department of Information Resources. Since then, the Information Solutions and Services Division has implemented temporary fixes to help remediate the identified issues. At the same time, we're working on the upgrade and security remediation project, which has 2 phases. Phase 1 of the implementation was approved back in fiscal year 2018, and we're getting ready to sign off on all the deliverables in early November. So Phase 2 will deliver this fully functional environment with the latest version of the software installed, and we will modernize all our legacy reports using coding and security best practices. At the same time, we will train our staff, so we will have a trained workforce that will be able to provide long-term support on this product for our agency staff. Because of the contract, the cost of the contract is above $142,000. So according to the statute, we're required to seek the committee's approval before the agency can finalize and execute this contract. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are three of us actually on the committee, so you all are going to be busy to the extent that we've got to make motions and whatever. So are you ready to make a motion?
Ready to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
And the second from Mr. Anwar. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much. The last item under agency operations is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the certification of Texas Research Incentive Program, which we call TRIP, funds to the emerging research universities. And members, this item would normally come under the oversight of the Committee on Accountability, Affordability, and Planning. However, due to timing issues, this information was not available in September when that committee met. Therefore, staff is bringing this item to Agency Operations Committee for consideration before going to the full board. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will present this item to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Steen, and
Yes,
good afternoon, board members. The Texas Research Incentive Program, or TRIP, was created by the legislature in 2009 to incentivize our emerging research universities to solicit private gifts for research. We have 8 institutions that are eligible under TRIP: UT Arlington, UT Dallas, UT El Paso, UT San Antonio, the University of Houston, the University of North Texas, Texas Tech University, and Texas State University. The first 7 were eligible at the beginning of the program. Texas State became eligible in 2012. In order to be eligible, these institutions need to offer a comprehensive range of excellent undergraduate and graduate programs, award at least 30 PhDs annually based on a rolling average of two consecutive years of degree production, and generate at least 20% of the research university's criteria for research dollars adjusted for inflation every year. And so currently it's 20% of $161 million in 2016 dollars. We determine that by a rolling 2-year average. So in other words, for UT Austin and for Texas A&M, they are classified as research universities in our system. There's an expectation for them in terms of research dollars. We look at what they're generating, and then we take 20% of that, and that's the expectation for institutions to join the TRIP group in terms of being eligible. Since the program's inception, emerging research universities have received more than $661 million in gifts that have either been certified as eligible by the board or may be eligible pending certification. And of course, what you're going to be voting on today is our latest round of TRIP matches that have gone through our approval cycle. So far, the legislature has appropriated over $326 million for TRIP, and that matches $417 million in private gifts that were given to the institutions. And the reason that the match doesn't exactly match the gift amounts is that the gifts are matched depending on the amount. So gifts between $100,000 and $999,000 are matched at 50%. Gifts from $1 million to $1,999,000 are matched at 75%, and then $2 million to $10 million, those gifts are matched at 100%, and gifts over $10 million are not matched. The matching grants are awarded in the order of the deposit until the funds are depleted. So the legislature provides funds for TRIP. We have a queue as the gifts come in. They are matched depending on when they came in, but there is a review process to certify gifts for matching because not all gifts that are submitted to us are eligible. In terms of how that review process works, we send information about all of the gifts, all of the documentation we receive is redacted in terms of names or information that the institutions don't want us providing in terms of the donors. But we provide those gifts back to all of the 8 institutions for them to review the matches, and they are allowed to challenge. In this last cycle, we had 75 matching requests. Peers challenged 38 of those requests. We have an internal committee that meets. The decision was made to uphold 12 of those 38 challenges, and then there were additional 2 requests that the committee did not recommend for matching. We notify the institutions, and they are allowed to appeal to the commissioner. We had 5 appeals to the commissioner for this round, and all 5 of those appeals were denied. So in terms of where we are in the cycle right now, what is in the queue that has not yet been funded, we have about 93 million of gifts that were previously certified by this board but haven't yet been funded by the legislature. In the last session, just 35 million was made available under TRIP, and that was actually the smallest amount we've seen since the program's inception. We have 51.1 gifts that have been peer reviewed, and they are waiting for your approval, your certification today and then tomorrow at the board meeting. And then we have received 34.5 million in gifts that are pending our review. So that's the next cycle that we'll go through. We'll review those gifts, any additional that come in, and we'll bring those to you when we've completed the cycle process. I'm happy to answer any questions about this process.
No, we don't have a handout on this, do we? Or do
You don't, but I'd be happy to provide you with actually what my talking points, which has the detail of what I just provided.
And our role in this is a role of certification?
Certification, right, of that 51 million in gifts that has gone through the review process and been approved.
I just ask for questions or comments.
Yeah, question, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Eklund, the review committee, how is that? Is it appointed?
No, the review committee is internal, and it includes Dr. Gardner, Dr. Rex Peebles, myself, and David, and members of my staff who work with the TRIP submissions, so David Young and Ed Buchanan, who receives those submissions.
Okay. Thank you.
But it is important to note that of course all of the institutions involved in TRIP have the opportunity to review all of the projects that have been submitted and challenge any that they would like to, and we take a look at those challenges as part of our internal review.
Ms. Tran, you want to?
Are the matched funds, are they restricted use?
They're restricted to research, yes, and
does it, if the gift was dedicated to a specific use, is the matched funds also restricted to that specific use?
oh, I see your question. No, they're not. The institution just receives the funds. I'm going to look for David Young is here, and are there any restrictions at all on the matches? No, there are not.
Okay, so I should know this. What is the program called if there's a fund and, there are requirements to admit? I think University of Houston is a member, maybe Texas Tech, and then University of Dallas is close. That's a different...
Are you talking about the NRUF, the National...
NRUF.
NRUF, yeah,
Okay.
National Research University Fund, yeah. And that's separate from this.
Dr. Eklund, is there anything controversial about what we're certifying today?
No, I believe that's why we go through the process, is to review the gifts in terms of, controversial. It's, we just look at the gifts in terms of whether they meet the criteria for research.
Was there anything within your review of it that was controversial?
Well, we did
Yeah,
have people that contested our decisions and
yes,
appealed, and we rejected all of those appeals. So I'm sure that from their point of view, the process was controversial.
And how, generally, what is there a way to generalize what those issues were?
we see a range of different things. Some are very straightforward in terms of the technicalities of the program. So an example would be an institution didn't provide documentation of the donor's check or gift. They have to provide documentation of the gift with the donor identified and when the funds were deposited. There are certain there are
That's the
restrictions.
type of thing that they can clear up, right?
Yes, exactly. And there are a certain number of days when we have to receive the information about the funds being deposited or it's not eligible, so we have to be very careful of when we receive information about the gift and when the funds were deposited. So there's those types of things, and then a lot of discussion about the purpose of the gift. I think we have in our meetings, is it truly for the research purposes that are allowed under the law and the rules? So we have those types of discussions as well.
Mr. Tina, I think probably the most consistently controversial issue is the one of what is actually research.
Yes.
There are occasions when we receive proposals for support that seem to us to be more training grants and research grants. They're intended to bring in students from underrepresented groups into a project, but the money is not for the research. It's to provide fellowship support or financial support for students in those environments. And sometimes the shading is pretty vague. But I would guess that's probably the most consistent area of controversy or dispute.
I would agree, David.
I just want to add to that many times that particular question is brought up by other institutions because they very closely review each other's requests. So some of these are initiated by staff, but I'd say the majority are initiated by other institutions who are questioning whether the request submitted by another institution fulfills the requirements of the law and our rules. So there's a lot of looking at each other by institutions as well.
Any other questions or comments? Now I'll entertain a motion, and the motion would be to approve the certification of Texas Research Incentive Program TRIP funds to the emerging research universities. So moved. Dr. Farias moves, second by Mr. Anwar. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The first item under Finance is consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the issuance of State of Texas college student loan bonds in one or more series to refund the 2007A and 2008A bond series, and delegation of authority for administration and approval of these activities necessary to complete the sale of the private activity bonds. So Mr. Ken Martin, Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services / CFO, will present this item to the committee. Also present to answer any questions is Mr. Richard Donahue of McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton. Where are you? Okay. Mr. Lee Donner of Hilltop Securities, welcome. And Ms. Yava Scott of Yakari Consultants. Good. Welcome, Ms. Williams. We're on item 5, Finance, if you want to catch up with us. And we've just seated this panel. And I think Dr. Martin, Mr. Martin, you're going to proceed, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This item, as you know, the coordinating board manages a student loan program, and it has various different types of student loans. There's $1.5 billion of outstanding loans in the program. And within the program, there is a little over $200 million of be-on-time loans, and then roughly $1.2 to $1.3 billion of college access loans. The college access loans are funded by bonds that we issue predominantly annually. And in this particular case, we have bonds that we've issued from 2007 and 2008 that after a 10-year period are callable, meaning we can actually pay them off. And the process of doing so is called refunding. And to pay them off, basically we issue new bonds, and you would do that similar to refinancing your house. You would refinance your mortgage if the interest rates, prevailing rates, were lower than what you were paying on your other debt. And this is a similar situation in the case where we can pay off these bonds, the 2007 and 2008 series, approximately $111 million, by issuing new bonds, and also the coordinating board will contribute $10 million to that. And because the interest rates on the new bonds and a shorter term on the new bonds, what's called refunding bonds that we'll issue, It will produce roughly $15.5 million in net present value savings. Now, in your agenda item, it was 17.5, but interest rates have ticked up a little bit. We're looking to try and price around mid-November, pending approval of the resolution. And it does yield approximately $35 million of cash value savings. So cash value over the life of the old bonds, approximately 11-year period, we would save $39 million. When you discount that back, net present value is $15.5 million. And the resolution gives us the...
Mr. Martin, 15.5.
$15.5 million of net present value savings. But we also look at the cash flow savings as well, because we have to make sure that we have enough cash flow in our debt service fund to make our debt service payments annually. Otherwise, a comptroller is required by law to step in and make up the differential. So we look at an annual basis. We look over the entire life of all of our portfolio, all of our bonds. We have also run an analysis on this to make sure it does not yield any substantial what's called arbitrage rebate or liability. Because these are tax-exempt bonds, we can only make a 2% differential from the arbitrage yield calculation at the time of sale to all of the loans, the interest rates on the loans, et cetera, combined that's calculated. And this does not provide a substantial liability. We have had a refunding in the past a while back that did, though there are savings, there is the negative consequence that you then have to remit funds back to the Treasury for any excess that you make on those bonds. But these bonds so far in the analysis do not yield a substantial liability. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I do have Mr. Donahue here. I'll have him touch base on the resolution, similar to new money resolution. I'll have him touch base on the nuance there, and then I'll have Mr. Donner and Ms. Scott talk a little bit about market and market conditions, et cetera, and then we're happy to answer any questions
So,
from
Mr.
that point.
Donahue, go ahead. Welcome.
Good
Welcome
afternoon.
back.
Thank you. Hi. What you have before you is the official action of the board. It's the resolution authorizing the issuance of refunding bonds to be considered by the board. It will have a delegation process for the issuance of the bonds, similar to what we did back in July for the new money bonds that were authorized. So the resolution does not have the final terms of the bonds. Those will be established when you go to the market later after we have bond review board approval, but you're delegating to either the commissioner or your chief financial officer to sign a certificate with the final interest rates and principal amounts for the bonds. That said, the resolution has certain parameters that they're required to live within. Primarily, you're not allowed to increase the principal amount. The refunding bonds can't exceed the principal amount of the bonds being refunded. That's a constitutional limitation. There is a requirement that you have to produce net present value savings, as Ken already covered. They're looking at some pretty substantial savings right now. For tax reasons, we've got a pretty short maturity on these bonds that we're looking at. They can't exceed the weighted average maturity of the current bonds that are outstanding, so it'll be a short period of time. There's no extending the maturity beyond the time of the original bonds. These bonds are going to be payable on a similar lien status on parity to what your current outstanding bonds are payable from, which is student loan repayments with the state of Texas general obligation backstop. So we just got ratings in from the rating agencies the last couple of days. It has the same AAA rating as your existing bonds. The process we'd be looking at now moving forward would be obtaining the board approval tomorrow, and then going forward with requesting the bond review board to give us an exempt issuer approval as soon as possible in November so we can get the bonds priced and closed by the end of November.
And I will say, as Mr. Donahue mentioned, there is one nuance with this, is that these new issue bonds, to be tax exempt, we have to get a portion of the state's allocation from the federal government of the tax exempt authority. In these bonds, since we're refunding already tax-exempt bonds, we do not need to do that. But there is a nuance that the IRS has within this. There's always that but when you're talking with the IRS. We cannot go beyond 17 years from the original issue date of the bonds being refunded or paid off. So the current bonds, if we let them go as they are, would have approximately 11 to 12 more years before they were fully paid off. What we have to do, since we have that 17-year provision, we can only go out 7 more years. So these new bonds, the refunding bonds that we'll issue, will only have term up till 7 years on it. So there's 2 factors that drive the savings on this. You're taking longer-term debt and making it shorter-term, so shorter-term debt typically has a lower interest rate, and then the prevailing market rate right now is lower than when these bonds were issued back in 2007 and 2008. So those 2 combined are what really are producing the substantial savings with this deal. And I'll let Mr. Donner talk a little bit about market, and obviously the caveat I'll put out here is this is based on market rates as we know now. We're trying to get these to market as quick as possible, and presuming we get bond review board exempt status here in November and price before Thanksgiving, just so we can lock in as low a rate as possible. But all of this is predicated on current market rates. If some strange thing were to happen, it may not be produce any savings. We wouldn't do it. But since we have such a short term, we're looking at about 3 or 4 weeks, we do not foresee that.
So, Mr. Martin, you do have an election, right, that's going to occur?
We do have an election. That's why I'll always caveat this. And if you recall, 2 years ago with the presidential election, we were issuing bonds in December, and we had that normally scheduled, and the election happened, and with the anticipation of tax cuts and reform in economy, interest rates spiked about 1%, and we got caught in that window. Last year, we issued a year later in December to avoid potentially the elimination of these private activity bonds, which did not happen, and we were actually about 1% lower than the year prior. That's how much we got caught just because of the election. So absolutely, that's a great point.
Good afternoon, Lee Donner with Hilltop Securities. Just a couple things to add on to what Mr. Martin and Richard have already pointed out. You haven't done a refunding in over 5 years, so might bear to touch on a couple of these briefly. Part of the reason you haven't done a refunding in about 5 years are some of the tax law complications that Ken and Richard have touched on. Those don't always work in your favor. In this particular case, they're not, as Ken indicated, they're not creating any problems. To give you some context, since you haven't done a refunding in a while, although it's not a written rule or law anywhere within the municipal finance world, refunding is generally considered a smart move if you can produce net present value savings around 3%. Again, that's a rule of thumb, a rule of practice. It's not a hard and fast rule. The projected savings here, as Ken has already indicated, are future value $39 million reduction in debt service, which comes out to a net present value savings of $15 million, give or take, and that's almost 14% net present value savings. So nearly 5 times what the industry would tell you is a smart refunding. So you're on very safe ground there. As Ken has indicated, part of that savings is coming from the fact that, as required by tax rules, you're shortening your debt service by about 6 years. The refunding bonds are about 6 years shorter than the bonds being refunded. But more of it is coming from the interest rate differential. Right now, and as Ken has pointed out, interest rates move, they change, they could change significantly between now and the time we go to market if you approve the transaction. But right now, the yield on these bonds ranges between a 2.28 and a 3.03 on the refunding bonds at current market rates. Even if interest rates moved a full 100 basis points, 1 whole percent, your net present value savings on the transaction would still be just slightly under $10 million. So it would take a humongous move in interest rates for you to be out of the money or below that 3% net present value savings level. So as your financial advisor, we would, of course, strongly recommend that you proceed with the transaction and capture that, those savings while you can. I want to acknowledge our co-financial advisor who became part of your financial advisory team as of the last RFP process, Yava Scott, and Yava probably has a few observations to share with you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Welcome, yes. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'll echo what Lee did say, is that I do think that the current present value savings on this transaction gives you a lot of, reasonable comfort that the market won't move in a couple of weeks as rapidly as to negate all of those savings. And clearly, the cash flow savings as well as just pure net present value savings of refinancing this is a positive move for the board. So,
One last piece I would add. The volume of municipal debt coming to market between now and the end of the year is projected to be significantly, perhaps dramatically lower than it was last year because we were looking at pending potential tax law change, so you saw a lot of volume last year. That volume's not going to be there this year. And as a AAA rated credit, these bonds will be very much focused on by the big institutional buyers.
that's right. Texas paper is very well received in the market.
Good. Thank you.
And I will make one note, just for disclosure, we also modified the bond counsel contract for the limit on the amount. If you recall, about a year ago, we went to RFP for the bond counsel contract, and the AOC recommended that we limit the amount. I had $400,000. AOC recommended we limit the amount to just 2 bond issues, what we knew we would need within that. And because of this refunding, we needed to increase the limit on that contract, so we did seek board chair, vice chair, AOC chair approval to do so, and I just wanted to let you know on that.
Good. Thank you for bringing that up. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so just a couple of questions. So who, in the process, who monitors this and says, oh, hey, there's this opportunity? Second question is, do we pay Hilltop and Yacht Carl like a fee, for doing this?
So 2 questions. First answer is coordinating board and our financial advisors both monitor these, and our bonds that we issue have a 10-year call date. So all the ones that we have outstanding will have a 10-year call date, and so we're looking at that as that call date comes up, that ability to refinance, if you will. We're looking at that, and then as that came available August 1st for 2008 series, and that's when we said, okay, do we need to look at it? Unfortunately, we were doing the analysis, and we didn't have data, what have you, by the time for the July board meeting. That would have been ideal. We didn't have that at the time, in time for the meeting to produce the resolution. So we went with the new money resolution, and then wanted to get the resolution here for October. On the second, it is we pay a fee based on our contracts. I can't disclose the fee and the amounts, but we pay a fee per bond amount. And so new money bond has a fee, both bond counsel and financial advisor, and then refunding also has a fee, bond counsel. So we pay, depending on the amount that we'll sell for new money, that will determine the total amount we pay for bond counsel and our financial advisor, and then the same holds true for the refunding bonds as well. That'll be
And
a
that's
separate
like
fee.
an investment banking fee, not for the council, but
There will be an underwriting fee for
Underwriting
this that we'll pay at closing, and we'll have an Office of Attorney General fee that we have to pay. They do the final approval of the terms. We go to Price, have to submit all the information to the AG's office. They'll do final approval. We have to pay the Bond Review Board to do a review. So
but
there's
all
several
those fees are calculated or incorporated in the 15 million net present value.
That's correct,
number.
yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Martin, you're saying you can't talk about the fee because we're in a public meeting, is that correct?
Yes, sir, to disclose.
Could
I
you get
signed
that
a
information to Chairman Stedman?
Sure.
Would you like to know more about it? Yeah.
Sure. I believe so. We sign in part of General Counsel's process, which I agree with in the procurement. When we get the bids, we go to RFP, we get board and committee approval, and then when we're reviewing the responses from the vendors, we sign a non-disclosure agreement that we won't publicly disclose information, because that could be competitive information, et cetera, of them, including winners and ones that did not. So, but I'm happy to.
Are there any other members of the committee that would like to know about that? Okay, Dr. Farias, too. I guess maybe, if you mind sending it to everybody, just put confidential on there.
Sure.
One clarification I would like to offer, I should have mentioned this earlier. We are recommending that if the AOC approves and the board approves proceeding with the refunding transaction, that it be done on a competitive bid basis, which means that the bidding from the institutional investors for the bonds will include not only the interest rate but their underwriter's discount, which will produce, I assure you, the lowest possible interest rate and underwriter's discount. Thank you.
Are you going to bring the full group tomorrow?
I was not planning on, since most of the members were here. Mr. Donahue will be here tomorrow because we will need some signatures from a board chair, et cetera. But if you felt it necessary, we could. But we did not have that plan, similar to the new money
Sure.
resolution
No,
that we did.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you.
So the next item under finance is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee to approve a 2-year extension for the current student loan software contract. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item, as you know, we just talked about our loan program. In order to service the loans in that $1.5 billion portfolio, we need software to do so. In 2015, we signed an agreement with Nelnet LLC for software to manage and service origination, and some litigation of our loan portfolio. With that said, we had 4 years in the original contract and two-year options. Hopefully I said that correctly. So a total of 8 years in that contract. The first 4-year term is coming due at the end of this fiscal year, actually I believe in June, and I'm requesting to invoke the first 2-year extension on that contract. And of note, for members that may not have been here when we went through that contracting process, we were paying roughly $1.3 million. It was on a sliding scale with the previous vendor and software, with the size of the portfolio as it grew. And just converting to this new contract, a firm fixed price of $700,000 annually, we yielded $500,000 to $600,000 of annual savings for the program in the software. So it is very beneficial to retain the software. You've seen when we went through the RFP process for bond counsel, FA, that it is very much a niche market when you're talking about student lending. There's a lot of bonding out there, but when you get down to the specifics of student lending, IRS requirements related to student loans and so on that we've discussed previously and today, it's really a small market, and there's a small market of players in student loan software. So the vendor that we found when we did the RFP process really none of them met all of our requirements. This one met the most, and we just did not have a resounding set of vendors to really go through, which is a little troubling for me. Excuse me, one of the options was also to customize your entire software. We just didn't feel we had the I'll say aptitude to be able to start from ground up and really take a venture like that on, and the other contract was coming to expire within 1.5 years. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve a 2-year extension for the current student loan software contract? Moved by Mr. Anwar. Second by Dr. Farias. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. The last item under finance is a review of the fiscal year-end 2018 financial report to the board. It's an item that does not require any action. And Mr. Martin.
Thank you, and I'll be brief on this item. Normally, I present this report on a quarterly basis. At times when there really isn't anything notable, I'll just open it up to questions. In this particular case, since this is the year-end report for fiscal year 18, this will be the last report you'll see for that. And then in the January AOC meeting, that's where we'll have the first report for fiscal year 2019. A couple items I did want to point out here. Funding for administration for the loan program is provided directly. We've always said that the loan program is self-sustaining, so funding for the loan program and the administration it uses what we call loan funds, basically excess funds that we're drawing in excess of our debt service requirements, and we utilize those funds to pay for the loan program, what we call the direct as well as indirect support for that program, and that's around $15 million annually. We were able to return, due to various efficiencies and processes, we're able to return about a little over $1 million back to loan funds that weren't utilized in our current budget, which was great. About $460,000 came from ISS relating to our contract with DIR and outsourced services, as well as a myriad of other savings with the direct loan program and various indirect areas within it. So that was one item I wanted to touch base on. Also, the loan collections towards the end, we always have the report with the Office of Attorney General showing the loan collections and how much they produce. And I'm happy to say they produced $12.5 million, which is the highest they've produced. And as you can see on the graph, as I'm pulling it up, there it is, that it continues to increase. And for those of you that may not know, we converted to the Office of Attorney General around 2010. I think it was a fiscal year 9 to fiscal year 10 transition. And you can see since then it's been on a steady increase. And that really hallmarks what we need in this program is to maintain efficiency. Since it is self-supporting, that these efficiencies help us maintain low cost, which helps us maintain the lowest interest rate for students on the student loans.
Well, that's good unless defaults are rising and you're just catching up to the increased defaults. But so on a percentage basis, they're actually collecting more than had been in the past.
That is a great point. And then let me say that defaults are slightly increasing on a percentage basis. Now, I'll caveat this from the standpoint that if you recall, prior to my arrival in this role, the credit score was set to, I believe, if I recall correctly, 580, which was subprime. 650 is typically considered the baseline before you get into subprime. I came before the board approximately 2 years ago, or the AOC, to get permission to move that credit score up. We moved it up to 650 and higher. So, and the reason that I made that request is it was set a couple years prior to my arrival. We had had a little bit of time to do an analysis and really look at the data and say, is this lower cohort having a higher delinquency, higher default rate? And we saw that it was. Even though it was only 2 years worth of data, we saw that some of those, from a delinquency rate standpoint, were up to 25%. So that's why I made the recommendation to the committee that we need to raise this. But we do have a couple cohorts, about 3 years of loans that were administered, and part of that cohort has 580 to 650, what I'll consider that subprime borrower in there. So we do have those, and we are going to see those flush through the system. And as anticipated, we are seeing a slight uptick in our default rate, but we've made the change to 650 and above, which requires a cosigner, and over time we expect then that default rate to flatten or decline again in the future, barring any recession.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Could you talk about any significant unexpended funds that will lapse?
Absolutely, and that was the third item I had on here. We do have one program, preceptorship, and we will have approximately $1.1 million lapse. It did not have UB authority. And if you recall, UB authority is the ability, unexpended balance, it's the ability to take your funds in your current appropriation year and move them to the next appropriation year. So if you're a company or an entity, I always say, you know, we have different colors of money here, but if you're just a corporation, you have one color of money, it's green and it lives forever. Here you do not. You get appropriated money for this particular time frame, appropriation year, and we need to spend it. If you have UB authority, then we can move that money forward and it lives and breathes for another year or however long we have authority to do so. In this particular program, it did not. They did receive a lot of large refunds towards the end of the year, of which they were not able to then get back out through RFP process and issue awards for it. They do feel that this year, in fiscal year 19, they'll be able to meet the spending for the program.
This is the program, I'm not sure if everybody recalls what the program does, but it provides stipends to students who are going, it's during the summer between their first and second year of medical school, to work in primary care physician offices in 3 specialties. It's family practice, internal medicine, and pediatrics. And they are given this stipend so that they can learn what it's like to work in that physician's office and expose them to the practice and so forth. So it's a good program. I guess they couldn't get the money out.
Out the door. Okay.
And that concludes my highlights on the report. This does not warrant approval, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Martin. The first item under internal audit is an update on internal audit reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Mark Pale, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this update to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Steen and members. We completed 2 internal audit projects since our July AOC meeting, and both of those reports are in your agenda materials. One of the projects is our annual internal audit report for fiscal year 2018. That report is statutorily required. We submit it each year to the State Auditor's Office, Governor's Office, LBB, and the Sunset Advisory Commission. The report compiles audit reports, the audit plan, and other information requested by the State Auditor's Office. So in essence, you've seen the materials that are contained in that annual report come to you periodically during the year. This is just a compilation of those activities. The second report is our audit of the Physicians Education Loan Repayment Program. This was a Category 2 report rating. For our newer board members who may not be familiar, we give 3 ratings in our system for our internal audit reports. Category 1 is no or only very minor audit findings. Category 2 is findings, but if addressed timely, do not pose a significant risk for the agency. And then Category 3 are those reports with findings that where we're specifically directing the board's attention because of heightened risk for financial or reputational harm to the agency. So this one was a Category 2. We had 8 recommendations contained in that report, and you'll see management has set forth their corrective action plans. The one item that I would draw your attention to in that report is the last recommendation was an agency-wide recommendation. We saw an opportunity on this project to recommend to management, to have a dialogue with management about an expansion of management's own assessment of risk. Certainly from an audit standpoint, we're doing ongoing risk assessment. We develop our audit plan based on that risk assessment, but there's a role for management to play in performing their own assessment of risk for all program areas in the agency. And so So that dialogue has led to some plans for the agency to develop that function a little bit better, and I think that it will serve to strengthen the control environment. It'll give us a basis when we come in to audit an area. We can look at management's own assessment of risk as one of the first steps of the process. So we really think that that's going to result in a nice improvement. So I wanted to call that to your
Who is going to,
attention.
Commissioner, who's going to be heading that up? Or?
You want me to answer that? So we're actually, the two deputy commissioners and the general counsel are responsible for it. I'm taking the lead in terms of developing the process in collaboration with our executive officers. So in fact, we're pretty close to finalizing a recommendation to the commissioner, who's going to sign off on that hopefully next week, on the process itself. I don't want to leave you with the impression that staff have not been doing risk assessment, but it's not been consistent across the agency, so we want to develop standards, a process, a step-by-step process, and provide some tools for which each division and department will be able to conduct this assessment on a regular basis. So we're going to have that in place by November 1, which is what we included in our management response. So we're going to have that done. So
That's really good. You did that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Brought that to everyone's attention.
Yes, sir. Thank you. If there are no other questions, that concludes my report.
The last item under internal audit is discussion of approach for obtaining an external quality assurance review of the internal audit and compliance monitoring functions. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pale.
Thank you. Just a brief background on this item. Every 3 years, internal audit has to go in external peer review. That's a requirement of state law, Government Code Chapter 2102. The peer review itself, aside from being statutorily required, obviously it provides the board, the AOC, with an independent assessment of our function in terms of how we comply with professional standards, in terms of meeting the needs of the various stakeholders. They typically conduct interviews of many of you and State Auditor's Office, other people that we regularly interact with. And so so that was done 3 years ago. It was brought to the Agency Operations Committee. The consultant that performed that review reported out to the committee and responded to any questions that you had at that time. So this starts the process again. The standards ask that we have a dialogue, that we keep you informed as to the process that we go through in selecting a peer reviewer. And so our intention is to follow the same process that's been followed in the previous 2 iterations since I've been in this position, and that is to work with Mr. Franz and his procurement staff in terms of seeking informal bids if they come in below a certain threshold. If not, then we'll need to go out with an RFP to actually get formal proposals for evaluation. We look at, in addition to the competence of the individuals performing that, we look certainly at the independence of whoever is seeking to provide this service. And ultimately, sort of the timeline for this would be this procurement activity would start fairly soon in terms of putting together an evaluation committee that would consist of myself and probably somebody from Mr. Martin's staff and possibly one other individual from our within our agency. We would then keep the committee informed as to what the results of that search are and the recommendation as to who we feel is the most qualified and meets the independence requirements to perform our external peer review. That would be done after the contract is executed. The service would be done sometime this summer, and then we would probably be, just like we were on the last iteration, reporting back to the committee most likely October of next year, after the evaluation and report is done late next summer.
Mr. Pale, this is the one that you did so well on, right? That they said so many nice things about you. Am I recalling that correctly?
We were very pleased with the results.
Could you tell some of our newer members just a summary of that? Don't be modest. But
They were very complimentary of the audit function. The consultant that performed the review has done hundreds of those types of reviews, and so he said some very nice things about our function, about our credibility, and just the level of service and compliance with the standards and so forth. So it was a thorough review, and we were very pleased with the results.
I always say we serve as volunteer board members. We really rely on Mr. Pale, and it was great to hear all the good things they said about how you're doing.
Thank you. So this is an informational item. No action is necessary. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Any questions or comments? Okay, the first item under compliance monitoring is an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pale will present this item to the committee. And then I guess I should say, Dr. Jay Kinzer, Vice President of Student Services at Trinity Valley Community College, is here today to make some brief comments regarding the report and their action plans to address the recommendations. Mr. Pale.
Thank you.
Welcome, Doctor.
We completed 6 projects since our previous meeting in July, and you have all of those reports in your materials. So the one that we wanted to focus on today, and I appreciate Dr. Kinzer being here to represent Trinity Valley, was a review that we did of the financial aid programs at Trinity Valley Community College. Back in the spring, we were notified by Trinity Valley of an issue that had occurred with a former financial aid director at that institution in terms of some suspected wrongdoing. And so after notifying the board and the state auditor's office in accordance with our policy, we then worked with Trinity Valley and conducted a review to determine the extent of the defalcation, to review more generally the use, predominantly of which was TEOG, was the grant program that was in play. And so as a result of that review, ultimately we identified $850 of TEOG funds that were misappropriated, and we interfaced with the federal authorities because the feds, the loss on their side was quite a bit more. It was fairly substantial, and so the feds agreed to take anything that we found with our program area, and they would work it into whatever criminal types of direction that they would decide to pursue. And so in addition to the $850 misappropriation of TEOG, there was another $17,000 of TEOG that was awarded to ineligible recipients based on a very weak set of financial aid controls and issues with a key member of the team at Trinity Valley. The other aspect of this is, while we were conducting our investigation, Trinity Valley informed us that they had misinterpreted the statutory requirement to provide matching funds awarded for TEOG grants. So the TEOG grants were not matched as required, and that resulted in $261,000 of undermatched awards. So it wasn't misappropriations, it was a requirement that the TEOG awards be matched with other sources of funds that the institution has at its disposal, and that matching requirement was not met. Trinity Valley has acknowledged the error and has proposed a plan to make students whole again, and And I thought with that, I would appreciate Dr. Kinzer. I believe he's representing the president of the institution, and I think he would like to talk to you about their plans in terms of corrective actions. Dr.
Ms. Bell,
Kinzer?
did you suggest that Dr. Kinzer come today, or did he?
Actually, we had some very productive meetings as this project concluded with the president and his team, a member of which is Dr. Kinzer. The president was not able to be at the meeting today, and so he asked Dr. Kinzer to represent the institution.
Welcome, Dr. Kinzer. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for allowing me to be here and represent the college and answer any questions that you may have about this issue, a very serious issue, and it is certainly a top priority of our college. I cannot stress that enough. It's something we take very seriously, and the President King would be here if there was any way he was able to do so. He's out of state right now, in fact, with our Board of Trustees at this moment. Again, we do take this very seriously. We acknowledge that the TEOG undermatching was an oversight on our part. The oversight occurred during a very critical transition in our Director of Financial Aid process. We had a director who was there for many years, did a great job, and she became ill, and she decided to retire. We had an extensive succession plan in place that we implemented, moving the assistant director into the directorship, and that happened in 15-16 year. And at that time, the TEOG matching rule changed, as you all are aware, to the point where we could not utilize Pell funds as our institutional match, and that was the part that was our error. We did not realize that change had happened, and we continued operating as we had. And now realize the error, and we certainly plan and will do all we can do to make those students whole again who were undermatched. In fact, we've already put together a plan. We've identified those students, and we're ready to move forward with reimbursing those students upon your approval. Regarding the other issues, we have corrected as well. We have made, it's in our response packet there for you to see, but we have made several personnel changes. We've made several organizational, structural changes. We've made procedural changes, and we've made technological changes. We're in the process of implementing an entire new ERP system, an integrated campus system that will take about a year, 18 months to implement. We're in the process of doing that right now. And once that's up and running, it's certainly going to change the way we do business, change the control systems, and will be a huge asset to the college and allow us to ensure these sorts of things will not happen again, and allow us to better serve students. That's our ultimate goal.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments? Ms. Williams?
Yes, ma'am. A great question. We have identified 292 students who were undermatched over the time. Of those, there are 23 students who are currently enrolled. And we plan to approach those students we plan to approach all of the students with options. We will offer them a scholarship. Those who are here now, we'll offer them a scholarship, or we will offer them a refund check. And then we will, we've identified, as I said, all of the students. We will contact all of them and offer them the opportunity to have a refund check, or we've also identified those students who have not yet graduated but are near graduation and have stopped out. We plan to offer those students the opportunity to come back and receive a scholarship in the amount of the reimbursement owed them, or a reimbursement check. We will reach out to them and make those offers to them.
Doctor, give us some sense of how this impacted some of the students. What's the magnitude of this for an average student that was Up to 290, whatever that you're talking about.
Yes, sir. Of the 292, the reimbursement range is from $6 all the way to $4,098. So it's a pretty good range that we're talking about there.
So you're going to be contacting some student and say that we're going to pay you almost $5,000?
I believe it's $4,098. Yes, sir. We are.
Mr. Pale, your perspective on what he's just said?
Well, I think the challenge was, given, the nature of how quickly students move through the institution, what do you do, with obviously the vast majority of them had already left, matriculated, or gone on, or stopped out, or what have you. So I think the solution that we talked about, and we visited with the commissioner and others to try to come up with what solution would make the students whole. Dr. King and his team at Trinity Valley were very receptive to that discussion, that framework, and so the solution that Dr. Kinzer just described, I think, achieves that in a good way.
So we do these compliance activities, and we get a range of responses. And I will say we appreciate it. We appreciate your coming in here and acknowledging the situation and then being proactive about taking care of it.
Well, thank you very much. I would also like to say thank you all and thank the audit team for working with us through this process. We've been working on it for several months now, obviously, and it's been a very positive, productive process. I believe we've learned through not only the compliance report but also the management letter. We've learned some things about the institution, and we've made some changes, and we will continue to make some changes that will allow us to better serve students. And so it's been a positive process.
Thank you very much, and convey our thanks to your president, too.
Yes,
Are there
sir.
any other questions or comments? All right.
That concludes my
Yes,
report.
okay.
Thank you.
Gosh, we made good time. I was thinking there must be another page in here. All right, this concludes the Committee on Agency Operations meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Dr. Farias, and seconded by Mr. Anwar. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, and the meeting's adjourned.